We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Chaf Amad Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 120a. And the previous summer, the Gemara said that the Benos Tzlavcha, the daughters of Tzlavcha, they waited a long time to get married in order to find a husband that was appropriate, even if it meant waiting until 40 years old. And the Gemara said, how could they wait that long? They wouldn't be able to have children. And the Gemara says, even though they were older, but physically they were younger, similar to Yocheved. Because it says by Yocheved, as the Gemara now continues, Efshar Basmeya Ushloshim Shana, is it possible that you have somebody who's 130 years old, Vikara La Bas, and yet in the Pasuk she's called Bas? This is talking about when Amram remarried Yocheved right before they had Moshe Rabbeinu, right before Moshe was born. So she was 130 years old and she's called Bas. The Yom Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, because Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina said, Zu Yocheved Shahurasa Bederech V'nolda Ben HaChomos. This refers to Yocheved. Yocheved was conceived while on the road and she was born between the walls. What that means is she was conceived before they entered Mitzrayim, when they went down to Mitzrayim, but she was born in Mitzrayim. T'chsiv, as it's written in the Pasuk, Asher Yalda Osa Levi b'Mitzrayim, that she was born in Mitzrayim, and that means Leidasa b'Mitzrayim, she was born in Mitzrayim, V'horasa Shalo b'Mitzrayim, but she was conceived not in Mitzrayim. That was before they went down to Mitzrayim. And so now this is about the time of the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 years old when they leave Mitzrayim. So therefore, since they're in Mitzrayim for 210 years, that means she's 130 years at this time. V'amai karu labas, and why is she referred to as Bas? Why is she referred to as if she's young? Amar Rav Yehuda Bar Zavida. Rav Yehuda Bar Zavida says, Malamed, it teaches us, Shenoldu Bas Simoni Naros, that physically it was like she was younger, she became younger. Nisad and Habasar, her flesh became smoothed out. Nispashtu Hakamotin, the wrinkles were straightened. V'chazer Hayofi L'makomo, and the beauty returned to its place. And the Gemara continues, Vayikach, so it says that the man from Beis Levi, he took the Bas Levi, that refers to Amram marrying Yocheved, but why does it say he took her? V'yachzor mi boile, it should say V'yachzor, because he's actually remarrying her. He was married to her before. Amar Rav Yehuda Bar Zavida, Rav Yehuda Bar Zavida said, Melamed, this teaches us Sha'asa La Maisa Lekuchen, that they made it as if it was a new marriage. Hoshiva Ba'Piryo, and they put her in the palanquin, which was what they put the bride in, that they carried the bride in. V'Aaron Miriam Mishorim Lefaneh, and Aaron and Miriam, they were singing before her. Umalachet Shareis Omrim, and the Malachim, they said Eim Habonim Samecha. They said the pasuk of Eim Habonim Samecha, and that's what happened again right before Moshe Rabbeinu was born. And similarly, that's what's going on with the Benos Tzlavcha, even though they were older at the time that they got married, but physically they were younger. And the Gemara continues, Lahalon Monon Hakos of Derech Gedulason. Further on, the Psukim, they list the Benos Tzlavcha according to their age. Vekan, but over here, Derech Chachmason, they list them according to their wisdom. They put the wisest first. And the Gemara says, Messiah Leila Rabbi Ami, that supports what Rabbi Ami says. The Yom Rabbi Ami, because Rabbi Ami says, B'yeshiva halach achar chachma. When it comes to yeshiva, which refers to Torah learning or judgment, then you seat them, you follow wisdom. But Mesiba, when it comes to feasts, like feasts of celebration, like weddings, halach achar zikna, so then you go by age. Amar Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi says, V'hu de maflik b'chachma, v'hu de maflik b'zikna. When we do that, that's only if the person is much wiser or the person is much older. And the Gemara continues with another opinion. Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Benos Tzlavcha shekulos hayu. Actually, the daughters of Tzlavcha, they were all equal. Shenemar, as it says, Vatihiyena, it uses the word Vatihiyena in the pasuk. Havaya achas lechulin, it's like they're all the same, and that's why we find that they are listed in different orders. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Benos Tzlavcha hutru lihinase l'chol hashvatim. The Benos Tzlavcha, even though they inherited property, so you might think they shouldn't marry someone from a different shevet, because the property will transfer ultimately to a different shevet. It's not true. The daughters of Tzlavcha were allowed to marry men from other shvatim. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, L'tov be'einehem tiyena l'nashim, they can become wives to whatever is good in their eyes. Elamani mekayim ach l'mishpachas matei aviyem tiyena l'nashim. But what do I do with the other pasuk, which says that they should marry from the tribe of their fathers? That's Eitza Tova Hisian Hakasav there. The pasuk was just giving them good advice. Shelo yinasu ela lahagan lahem, that they should only marry somebody that is appropriate, that is fitting for them. And the Gemara continues, Mosif Rabba asks the following question, and more aleim, it says, say to them, La'osan ha'omdim al Har Sinai, means to say to those who are standing on Har Sinai, and L'doros eichem, and then it says, for all your generations, Elu doros haboim, that refers to the future generations. And the Rashbam first brings the full pasuk, Emor aleim l'doros eichem, kol ish asher yikrav mikol zarachem, el ha'kadoshim asher yakdishu b'nei Yisrael ha'Hashem v'tumasa, all of it's talking about bringing kodshim and being tamei. And again it says, Emor aleim, and it says l'doros eichem. And the Rashbam continues, Emor aleim hainu la'osan ha'omden al Har Sinai. Emor aleim means that we're telling those that the mitzvah applies to those who stand in Har Sinai. Nishna pasuk said, that's the context of this pasuk. pasuk. That's when it was taught. Umikan tilmod l'shar mitzvahs ha'amuros b'Torah. And the Brisa here is saying that we learn from here to other mitzvahs. Means to say, anytime it says a mitzvah stam, anytime it says a mitzvah and it doesn't say that it applies to a particular generation, so we assume shenemru bein la'avos bein ladoros haboin. We assume that all mitzvahs apply both to the fathers and also to the future generations. It applies to those who are standing at Har Sinai, and it applies also to those who will be in the future. And the Brisa continues, nemar avos lama nemar bonim. If it says that it applies to the fathers, to those who are standing at Har Sinai, why does it have to say the bonim, the sons? Why does it have to say that it applies to the future generations? Vim nemar bonim lama nemar avos. And if it says it applies to the sons, why does it have to say that it applies to the fathers? And the Brisa continues, mimnei sheyesh ba'avos ma'she'ein b'bonim v'yesh b'bonim ma'she'ein ba'avos, because there are some mitzvahs that apply to the fathers that did not apply to the children. There are some mitzvahs that apply to the children that did not apply to the fathers. B'avos huamar, for example, by the fathers, it says v'chol bas yoreshas nachala. It says any daughter who inherits, she should marry within her tribe. That did not apply for all generations. It only applied to that generation that was entering Eretz Yisrael. V'harbe mitzvahs nitztavu bonim shalom nitztavu avos. There are many mitzvahs that apply to the children that didn't apply to the fathers. That's all of the mitzvahs that apply only when you enter into Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvahs like Trumas and Maisris, they would not have applied to those who lived only in the Midbar. And so the Gemara now continues, Hamipnei sheyesh ba'avos she'ein b'bonim v'yesh b'bonim ma she'ein ba'avos. Since there are those that apply to the fathers and not the sons, there are those that apply to the sons and not the fathers. So that's why hutzrach lomar avos, hutzrach lomar bonim. That's why it has to say that in general we assume that a mitzvah applies to both the avos and the bonim. And the point of bringing this brisa is, as the Gemara now says, katani mihas. Nevertheless, what does it say in this brisa? What's the example of a mitzvah that applies only to that first generation? But avos hu omer, that by the avos it says v'chol bas yoreshes nachla. It says that pasuk of any daughter who inherits property, so she's supposed to marry within her tribe or within her father's tribe. And so the question is, that seems to be a mitzvah for that generation. And here we're saying by the benos tzlafchad, by the daughters of tzlafchad, they did not have to follow it, and it was just good advice. And the Gemara says, "Hu mosiv la v'hu mefarek la." The Gemara says, no. He asked the question, but he answered the question as follows: Levar mi benos tzlafchad. It's true that this mitzvah applied to the avos, and it applied to this generation of the benos tzlafchad, but the benos tzlafchad themselves, they were an exception. They were actually allowed to marry to any tribe. As the Rashbam says, Levar mi benos tzlafchad, with the exception of the benos tzlafchad, dehai v'chol bas yoreshes nachala. This pasuk of v'chol bas yoreshes nachala, which says that they have to marry, if they inherit property, they have to marry to the tribe of their fathers. Lav abanos tzlafchad kai. That pasuk is not going on the benos tzlafchad. The hagali lukra latov beineihem tihiena l'nashim, because there's already another pasuk which says they can marry whoever they want. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, quoting the Brisa we just brought above, B'yavos hu omer v'chol bas yoreshes nachala. Again, by the fathers it says v'chol bas yoreshes nachala, and it applies, as the Gemara now says, B'avos in bebonim lo. We're saying it applies to the avos, it applies to that first generation, but it doesn't apply to the future generations. My mashma, where do you see anything in this pasuk that it applies only to one generation? Amar Rava says Amar Kratz, because the pasuk says zeh hadavar. It says the words zeh hadavar, and we learn from there davar zeh lo yehei noeg ela b'dor zeh. This matter, it only applies in this particular generation. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabba Zuti le Ravashi. Rabba Zuti said to Ravashi, ela me'ata, but according to that, zeh hadavar de shchutei chutz. What about the phrase zeh hadavar, which is used by shchutei chutz when one shechts kachim outside of the Beis Hamikdash? Hachin ami de lo yehei noeg ela b'dor zeh. You're going to say that only applies in that generation? And the Gemara says to that, Shani Hasam, it's different over there, Tichsiv Ladorosam, because it says in the pasuk over there, Ladorosam, for all generations. So we know that applies to all generations, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Chaf Amid Beis.